Hello, everyone. Today's video, I'll be talking with Paul today. He is a recruiter who has been here for quite a while, and I've already had coffee with him, had a great chat, and got to know what he knows. But today, it's all about the viewers and the questions that you have. Welcome, Paul, and yeah, nice to have you. You've been here for a bit, so you can just give us a
I'll
brief
just give you the
introduction.
the potted bio. Yeah.
Yeah.
My background's in IT. I got a computer when I was a kid. Played games, learned BASIC. Thought this is the future. Went off, studied computer science, and then I worked in the software industry in London in the 90s for about 5 years. Had some Japanese friends. Came here on holiday in '98 for 2 weeks, and like many people, it was just like mind blown. I've got to be here. So went back to London, grey, cold, rainy, and I just spent the next 6 months planning my eventual trip to Japan. So I came over in the summer of '99 just with a backpack. I booked Japanese school for a couple of months, and the plan was just see if I could find a job. And luckily, I got introduced to a recruiter. Came up to Tokyo to visit them. I'd been in Kyoto. They couldn't find me a job, but I was available. I knew a bit of IT. I talked a lot, and they thought, "Do you want to come and work here?" And famous last words, I said, "I could do that for a year." So in
Yeah.
November '99, I put on my cheap suit and started wandering around having coffee with people, thinking, 1 or 2 years. And yeah, it's 24 and a half years now. So it's been a while. So
Older than
I've
some of
always
the viewers.
probably yeah, no, I get that as well. I talk to a lot of people like 22-year-olds, and they're kind of laughing when I talk about ancient history.
Yeah.
But I've recruited in the sort of English speaking or sort of bilingual IT world. When I got here, that was mostly sort of enterprise IT. So it was big companies that had business offices in Japan. They needed English speakers to work in global teams, and so it was like banks, insurance, pharmaceutical companies, consulting firms, all of that kind of stuff. Plus, there were many companies set up to kind of support them, local
Mm.
companies or international companies. So that was the kind of the scene. More recently, Japan has a startup scene now. Sort of the last 5 to 10, was it 8 to 10 years?
Mm.
So I do more work in the kind of the startup scene as well. Primarily as an agent. So I've worked mostly as an agent, a little bit of in-house work. I currently work for an agency called Smart Partners. It's a three-person agency. We're not trying to be Robert Walters or Hayes or hundreds of consultants. Um, it's set up by a friend of mine, Jason DeLuca, in 2007. We like being small. We're not trying to be like a big factory. I don't think people get a great experience with those kind
No.
of
Mm.
agencies. So we try and stay small, flexible, kind of customer service focused. In COVID, a lot of companies stopped hiring, so I set up a blog and a newsletter, added a job board onto that. So I sort of do some things in that space. I interviewed you, thank you very much, a couple of months ago. So it's nice to kind of learn about you and share your story. And then I do a little bit of consulting for startups. So many startups, the CTO is doing all the hiring. They don't have big budgets, but they'd like some help. So kind of part time, I kind of help CTOs hiring. So screening, do resume reviews, set up interviews, help manage the process, that kind of stuff. So a bit of a mix across the board, basically.
So you've seen quite a lot then in the last 24 years, especially with foreign engineers. So I think you're the most qualified guy I know of that can kind of give an honest opinion about
I hope
certain
so.
topics. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. I'd like to think I'm a long-term student. Expert gets bandied around a bit too much, but I think the scene is always changing. Where the jobs are, the kind of jobs. I used to recruit Windows 2000 engineers to do Active Directory work, Visual Basic 4 developers. Now it's sort of AI and modern web frameworks and other things like that. So the technology side has changed.
Mm.
Japan has changed throughout that time. I think there's a generational shifts that Japan's undergone. We were in the sort of the last decade, but now we're sort of the last 30 years maybe, but maybe we're coming out of that. Human nature hasn't changed so much, but a lot of the day-to-day kind of stuff has changed for sure. So it's been pretty interesting to kind of watch that and be involved in that.
Yeah, we're going to go through quite a few questions here, but I'd just like to let the viewers know that Paul did all the I have all the questions from my Discord group, and Paul like fixed it all up and kind of prepared just in case you don't want to be unprepared for these types of
Yeah,
questions.
I
So
didn't. I didn't want to just sort of shoot answers from the hip.
yeah,
People have
yeah,
taken the time to I think there's some really good questions in here. So I read through them. I put together a few notes. If you see me looking away, I'm just kind of scrolling the notes. But the sort of points I don't want to. I want to make sure I don't miss for a lot of these questions as well, because there's some nuances or there's some very important information I think people should hear.
Yeah, great. So I've categorized into eight, and I'll put it into the timeline, and then the description, so everyone can see the relevant parts that they want to see. Should we just get straight into the first?
Let's jump in.
So the first is the common mistakes and challenges, and I'll ask the question. You just go off and so what are the common mistakes and biggest hurdles that foreigners face trying to land a job at a Japanese company?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, for me, thinking about that, I thought Japanese company or company in Japan, because it's similar answers. So, hurdles, I think, I mean, the first hurdle for most people is Japanese language. If you're not a sort of business level Japanese, your options are much more limited. If you're N2, N1 above, you've got a lot more options. So, the English speaking IT scene has definitely grown in the last 10 years. I think a lot of that goes to Rakuten when they changed their working language from Japanese to English in 2010. Took them a while to get kind of ramped up. It was a bit of a struggle, but it let them bring people in from anywhere, English speakers from all over the world. People came in, some people stayed long term at Rakuten, others went out into setting up startups, other companies, and that kind of spread the English as a working language possibility. So there are more options. It's Japan. Most users are Japanese. Interfacing with Japanese users is something that, in agile development, people are doing a lot more than the old kind of just write a spec and bang it out somewhere in a dark room. So at first I think sort of Japanese language is a hurdle. Second thing, probably visas. Qualifying for visas, and also currently processing time for visas. So if you don't qualify for like a spouse visa or a Nikkei, an ancestral visa, you're typically looking at the engineer visa or a highly skilled professional. So a highly skilled professional, point-based system. It has a kind of fast track for approval, so 3 or 4 weeks. That's pretty decent. Engineer visas, if I look back 10 years ago, like 2 to 6 weeks. They were pretty fast, but now it's 2 to 3 months.
Yeah.
And companies are, it's a hurdle because, having someone here that can start with 1 month's notice is much easier than waiting 3 months. So I talked to one person a couple of days ago, and he had an offer. And unfortunately, the company here, he's overseas, the company pulled the offer when they found out how long the visa processing was going to be. They said, we can't wait 3 months. I'm sorry. We're going to have to look locally. And that was, and that company, he was the first person they were going to hire from overseas. They'd never done it before. I guess they just thought stamp a few pieces of paper, but unfortunately not. So, visa processing.
Just a short one about that. Yeah. My permanent residency is going to take over a year.
Yes,
it's 10 months and a half now. Yeah,
I've just read someone posted on LinkedIn last week. It was taking a year. Mine was about 6 months. It was like 6 months to the day, and that was about 6 years ago, 2018. Yeah. And I know people who got them done in 3 months. Very slow business manager visas if you're doing the set up a company. 6 months for those and other things I've heard. So it's slow. A lot of people want to come here, but doesn't look like immigration has ramped up the people to do the work. Unfortunately, but that's sort of Japanese government. I think for another hurdle for people, if you're overseas, is the fact that you're not sort of already here. So you might be seen as sort of a risky hire. So, do you have a connection with Japan? If you've lived here in the past, if you've studied Japanese, any kind of connection makes you appear less risky. Companies are worried. They hire someone, they go through all this process, the person gets here, it's July, they go, wow, I didn't realize the weather sucks in Tokyo so bad in July, and they quit and they go home. It's kind of extreme example, but companies, to manage their risk, will try and hire locally first of all, because people, with a life already. But there just aren't enough people here to fill the demand, so I think it's still a hurdle, but if you can sell yourself as someone that knows what they're getting into, then I think they can perhaps overcome that. Common mistakes. I think back to visas, I get resumes from people that want to work in Japan and they just don't qualify for any kind of visa, so they haven't kind of looked into the requirements. So typically it was sort of like it was, I always learned bachelor's degree or 10 years experience. Now the degree
Yeah.
side, there can be some flexibility, perhaps associate degrees, 3-year degrees. Some countries have very different sort of education systems, 3 years, 5 years, and so on. But if you've done like a boot camp and you've got 1 year's experience, you're just not going to be able to be sponsored.
Mm.
So that's sort of, and I'm writing back to people saying, listen, I'm really sorry, but I don't think you can get a visa.
So
And
you can't even apply, right, if you don't have the requirements, or can you apply and
you
just get rejected?
you could apply. Yeah, I mean, you could apply to a company. The company, you'd expect the company is screening people from
Okay.
overseas on visas as well. Or they may write back to you saying, do you have a bachelor's degree, what have you?
Okay.
Or do you qualify for some other kind of thing? But most internal recruiters or HR people have a decent idea of the process of sponsorship, and so they're not going to kind of put in an application to immigrate. The visa lawyer they use would just say this isn't going to work. We're just going to get rejected.
Mm.
So I sort of think people have invested months applying, writing cover letters, but they don't
Yeah.
realize they probably don't qualify for a visa. So unless Japan again makes more changes to the visa program, now perhaps for some people working holiday would get them over here. At least they get
Yeah.
a year here if they qualified. So I think that's a mistake. I think others is sort of not doing research and thinking that the job market here is the same as the job market where you're coming from, and
Mm.
just sort of thinking things work the same. Salaries, I talk to people and they quote me, salaries that are sort of US salaries, right? You
Ah.
get developers making $250,000,
Yeah.
and they're like, I'm looking for 35 million. I'm a back end engineer with 5 years of experience, and I'm like, I'm sorry, here's a link to Open Salary,
Yeah.
JP, and it's just not the market here. So I think not doing research to kind
Yeah.
of see what it's like, and
I sorry about that one. I rage
yeah,
at people nearly. I nearly rage at Americans that tell me stuff like just and I know I shouldn't, and I know it's either I think they probably know they're taking the Mickey out of me and just saying I'll just get 100K dev job from university. I'm like, no, mate, no, that's not how it works here. But
yeah.
yeah, I just get a bit, yeah,
I think in the US you probably need the 100K job to pay your student debts, right? So I
yeah,
understand, but I think if you're looking at, if I want to move to somewhere,
yeah,
it's kind of on me to understand that market. Do I
yeah,
visas, salaries, and other things, and for me to localize into that, and understand my value, and I want to
yeah,
promote myself and do well, but. I think if I'm just kind of asking for outlandish kind of things, I'm not going to be
yeah,
taken very seriously. I think another mistake is probably not just looking at salary or having the conversation sooner.
mm,
It's not uncommon for Japanese companies to just do salary at the HR interview at the end. You go
yeah,
through a whole process and they say, "What's your expectations?" You go 15 million, and they go, "Ooh, we're thinking about six for this."
yeah,
And then you're like, well, I've just spent a month, and no. So try and raise those kind of conversations. If you're talking to
mm,
an agent, they should understand that the salary
yeah,
ranges, but do research again. If you're having a screening call with a company's internal HR person, say, by the way, the market's very different. Could you tell me a little bit about your budget, and kind of do that a little bit sooner rather than later? Because it's very disappointing if you find that out
mm,
at the
yeah,
end. And also, I think a mistake is probably just not understanding that, well, related perhaps earlier, that Japanese companies hire very differently. Mid-career hiring is a relatively new idea. It's sort of 20 or 30 years.
mm,
It's job for life. So the way companies hire, the things they ask, what's your current salary? Send us a pay slip. All of these kind of things, people tend to freak out at. But that's sort of the way it is. So
yeah.
there's ways of dealing with things if you're here, or if you kind of understand how to do that. But again, things are going to be different, and if you expect everything to be the same, just living in Japan is going to be so different anyway. It's going to be a big shock to the system. So I think research, understand
Yeah.
the market, understand how you might fit in is the way to go.
I'll go to the next one. Yeah, this is to do with foreigners and local talent. And I think maybe you just already talked about that, but do recruiters find that companies are more picky about hiring foreign staff than Japanese staff? Especially foreign
Yes.
staff in Japan as well. I mean, there's a few
Yeah.
moving
Yeah.
parts there.
Yeah, so I'd say it really depends company to company. I think what companies are looking at is, will you sort of fit in to
Mm.
life in Japan if you're new? Will you fit into the company? So I know sometimes companies like they're hiring their first non-Japanese engineer, and they're very nervous. Like, what's it going to be like? Is this person going to start arguing with the company president and in the first Monday morning meeting, or how does it work? I think if you're here, if you've got a life here,
Mm.
you've been living here a few years, you're seen as local. I think that you're sort of you're just a local entity, and I don't see there's much issue. But if you're quite new, or if you're applying from overseas and you don't show a strong connection, a strong interest,
Mm.
it can be. Again, some companies don't really care, but others are just what they're worried about is hiring someone who leaves quickly. And then
Yeah.
they've got to do the whole process again. And maybe they've spent money on a visa lawyer and they've waited 3 months and then they've onboarded someone. And 3 months later, the person's kind of, I'm not, this isn't for me. It's not like the holiday I had, and I'm kind of worried. It doesn't happen that often. It does happen sometimes, and that's where companies may be a bit more careful. But again, if you communicate with them your commitment to being here, I think companies generally will
Th-
kind of take
that's
that.
that's why I tell people who are already in Japan and have very little skill. I say you're halfway there more or less because you're
Yeah,
here. You've been here for a couple of years. They can trust you. You probably speak enough to get around or get better. And yeah, like what you just said, if you're already
yeah,
here,
yeah.
that just helps so much.
Yeah. You're a known entity. You've shown you can kind of survive in Japan,
Yeah.
and or just survive not away from home, in some respects as well. Because it's a big thing. I had you know probably at times very sort of homesick for home, lonely, missing friends, missing family,
Mm.
these kind of things as well. If you've been here, you've got a life built up, or you show the commitment, then I think there's less of an issue.
This person asked, I see some job postings recently advertising positions for complete beginners, offering training in a specific stack, and then transitioning to projects. Do you ever see foreigners being recruited for these types of level entry positions?
Yeah, do you know I hadn't seen those kind of roles, and I haven't spoken to anyone who's done that. So so I've no experience with that whatsoever. I can see this is sort of like a Japanese company's attempt to
Yeah,
sort of bridge the skills gap, right? So bring in
yeah,
people, apprentice them,
yeah.
train them up, get them out working, and things like that. So it makes sense for companies to be doing that here. Would those companies recruit foreigners? It really is going to depend on those
Mm,
companies, I think, and it's going to be case by case. I think probably a lot of them are expecting quite strong Japanese language skills. But if
mm.
I had the skills and I was here, or even if I had the language skills and I was overseas,
Yeah.
I'd give it a go and just see what happens. The worst it can say is no, but if you got in and were able to apprentice your way into a career, then it'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I think those are mostly those real Japanese types of companies. Yeah, for most people watching this channel, it's the hardest, probably one of the hardest routes to go through.
Yeah, I can't imagine it being an easy route, and there's probably you need to check out the companies, because you don't want to be on the hook for like training bills and stuff
Yeah,
like
yeah.
we've trained you up, so if you leave, you got to pay us 1 million yen. These kind
Uh,
of things happen overseas. I talked to people in some countries and they were on the hook for repayments.
yeah.
So I'd really want to check it out very carefully. But, I'd certainly give it a go and sort of see what happens.
Okay, so this one is my question, I think. I think engineers or workers always are like, me, to like recruiters. Look at me, I want this, I want this. But I'm trying to think like, how do you look ugly or unattractive to recruiters? Like, okay, I don't want to deal with this guy.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So I think the first thing, companies are expecting technical skills, but that's really sort of table stakes to kind of get the conversation going. What
Yeah,
hiring companies are also looking for is like normal, well rounded individuals.
yeah,
So they're looking for people who can communicate, work well with others, and things like that. So I think, if I was doing my best to sort of not get a job, I'd have a kind of sort of a sloppy resume full of spelling
yeah.
mistakes, 17 different fonts, and just bad presentation. And then I'd follow that up with like a cover letter addressed to like some other company, and that's got nothing to do with the job that you're applying for, and just write dreadful emails. And then I'd ghost some calls and not turn up for interviews, or I turn up 5 minutes late and I sort of wouldn't say anything. I just sort of pretend nothing had happened. So I think just, basically being sort of unprofessional,
Yeah.
or disrespectful, and just, think of it to you, if you were, in your day-to-day life dealing with somebody else, how would you like them to treat you? I think that's what most companies are looking for. So I think also, the sort of the arrogant people. I think maybe as an agent, I'm dealing with people that don't understand how things are here at work. So I
Yeah.
will sort of take the time to educate.
Yeah.
But I can't convince somebody that they're not going to get a 40 million yen job here with 2 years of experience. That's going to be up to them to sort of, realize how things work, or don't work. So, but I think, yeah, if you just come across as a pain in the backside,
Yeah.
now that doesn't mean sort of being assertive,
Yeah.
or I think being assertive or saying, thanks for showing me this type of role, but that's not the type of company I'm interested in. That sort of stuff I think is absolutely fine. Everyone's got preferences. The better I understand someone's preferences, the better I can find a match, right? Some people don't want to work in certain industries. Some people only want to work in certain industries. So if I get a pushback, no, I'm not really interested in that type of company, I'll ask why not, because maybe there's a miscommunication, but I'm absolutely fine. That's, it's not my life.
Mm.
They've got to get out of bed and do the work. So,
Yeah.
any information that comes into me, that's great. So I'm not worried about assertive people or people with preferences and things like that. But, if we have this call and I don't turn up, you're thinking, what's going on here? And
Mm.
then, you're emailing me and I don't reply. And then like I reply a month later, hey, let's have a call tomorrow. And I don't turn up for that. You're probably going to think, I'm just not going to talk to this poor guy anymore. What's going on here? So,
So you can kind of also break it down to just being a decent person, maybe, or something.
absolutely. Yeah,
Just
yeah,
being a
yeah.
decent
Just,
person.
treat people how you'd like to be treated
Yeah.
is the golden rule. It doesn't. It's very simple.
Yeah.
I think. And so yeah, just sort of follow that, and I think things will work out well for you.
Great. So I think we've gone through the common mistakes and challenges. Next up is recruiting and job application process. Okay. The next segment or section is recruitment and job application process. And the first question here is, how should someone already living in Japan approach recruiters when changing careers in tech? It seems like recruiters only care about candidates who already have experience. There's a lot
Yeah,
of engineers in Tokyo or Japan like this. So,
yeah.
what's your take on
So,
this?
so, so I read this as someone who's trying to get into the tech industry from something else. So maybe they've done a
Yeah.
boot camp or self-study and they're trying to get in. And how can they kind of approach recruiters? Um, the thing is, recruiters are not going to be much help, if any, to someone
Mm.
who's sort of totally entry level. Um, Basic recruiters are asked by companies to find particular people, and that's what we go off and do. And companies here don't ask us to find entry level people in general.
Mm.
Very rarely. I've had like one new grad role. Um, Companies don't want to pay a fee for someone they feel they could find themselves if they go to a boot camp and say, can we talk to some alumni, or just stick an ad. So recruiters are basically primarily meeting people that fit the roles that they've been asked to fill, or either immediately now, or the typical roles that they fill, and may say, I don't have a role right now, but I often get roles in your type, for your background, so I'm happy to have a chat. So I think I talk to bootcamp grads quite a bit, and they're
Mm.
sending messages off to recruiters, and they're not getting any feedback, and that's basically why. They probably can't help you, and their manager's going to complain if they spend any time talking to you. So if you're a bootcamp grad, if you're transitioning, you've got to take a different approach and really be your own recruiter, and go out into the market
Mm.
and very actively find the jobs yourself. And I wrote actually a blog post for bootcamp grads. During COVID, I got contacted by a lot of bootcamp grads, and it's like, I can't help you find a job, but let's have a chat and kind of let's see how
Mm.
you've been job hunting. And mostly it's kind of like I've sent off a couple of applications. I'm waiting to hear back, and then I have a look at the LinkedIn, and there's like 7 connections. And this was a pattern kind of amongst everybody. And
Mm.
so I just sort of like, you need to go find it yourself, but this is what you need to do. And I kind of laid out the program. So maybe we can link to the
Yeah.
article. But it's basically sort of like be your own recruiter 101, and getting out networking, various ways of kind of connecting with people. If you see an entry level, occasionally you will see an entry level role out there, definitely apply, but maybe also find who's advertising it, connect directly with that
Mm.
recruiter. Maybe they do get more junior, more entry level roles, but in general we're asked for sort of mid-career senior people.
Okay, the next one is do recruiters and hiring managers actually look at the portfolio page and projects and test out the projects to see the features?
That's
Do
a
they
very
go
that's
that deep?
that's a really good question. So I would say it's probably yes and no. Um, First thing a recruiter's looking at reviewing a resume is does it sort of fit the basic requirements for whatever the role is that you're looking for? And there's my dog barking. So, if I'm looking for a Java developer and I open a resume and it's a Python engineer, there's no Java, I'm very unlikely to be kind of looking at a portfolio there just to see if maybe there's
Mm.
some Java in there. Because again, that work experience is what the client's going to be looking at. Now, if I get something and it's, oh, Java engineer looks interesting and there's a link up there, for me, I click. I'm a nosy bugger, so I click. I go
Yeah.
in there, have a look at the GitHub. I'll have a look at portfolios. I'll try things out and do things like that. So I think it sort of depends. For hiring managers, I think, again, if they're hooked on the basic interest in the person, they will. I've spoken to CTOs who tell me they always check portfolios, especially front end developers, and they'll
Mm.
always check GitHub if it's there. But they want to see, are you active? And for the portfolios, they want to kind of see what you've been doing, and they will take that into account when it comes to sort of deciding on interview. So I would say recruiters, maybe yes, maybe no. We're more looking at the core resume experience. Hiring managers, I would say often, and before interviews as well, maybe they're going to have a look because maybe there's some interesting topics to talk about projects and things that can come up into interviews. So it is worth having a good portfolio. It's worth having a good, nice, clean, healthy looking GitHub on there because there will be people looking at it.
Yeah, and I'm also guessing if you're mid-career, it's not as important as if you're starting off. I'm guessing you're
Um,
looking at, oh, where did he work? What did he do?
yeah, it,
Rather than
yeah,
portfolio.
if you're mid-career, most of what you're doing is probably stuff that you can't show to people.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
internal work and NDA and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, if someone's been working at Goldman Sachs for 5 years, they're not going to have, here's our source code,
mm, yeah,
but they can say, I've worked at Goldman Sachs for 5 years, and that's kind
yeah,
of enough to get onto the call if it fits with what the hiring manager is looking for. So I think if you're more earlier in your career, totally entry level or first 2 or 3 years, then having those kind of things, you don't have the work experience to show off.
mm,
So showing off skills in other areas, then portfolio projects, open source, other stuff like that, then I think is your sales kind of sales point, your promotional material, basically.
yeah. Okay, then the next one is also, I think, my question. How do you spot a bad recruiting company or a recruiter? How do
Yeah.
yeah, how do we view this?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question because it made me sort of think, if I'm choosing a recruiter, how I would do it. So I
Yeah.
think there's sort of a macro level and a micro level. From a macro level, in terms of like a company, I would just sort of look at the company's reputation in the market. Look at Glassdoor. If you look at Glassdoor, for example, if the people who work there are complaining like it's an awful place to work, they're
Mm,
probably not delivering a great experience to the candidates and the clients they're working with either. So, I think you can find sort of about the company in general. And also there's, on Reddit, people will kind of make comments. Now, one thing is you can have a bad recruiting company that has good recruiters, and you can have a good recruiting company that has
mm,
bad recruiters. So it's hard to know, is it the company and is it systemic in the company, or is it
mm,
perhaps an individual you're working with? On an individual level, then I think, is the recruiter being professional? And when you're receiving correspondence or things like that, do you feel that this is a professional person respecting your time? Are they listening to you? If you feel like you're talking to the wall and they're just pushing whatever they have open at you, that's probably not going to be a great relationship, right? Um, are they sort of advising you and giving you help to sort of improve your situation. So, thanks for your resume. By the way, here's some suggestions to improve it. Or, talking about the market or benchmarking salaries or just being helpful, I think, in those kind of ways. So stuff like that. Are the roles they introduce fit with, again, what you've told them you're looking for, or are they just sort of pushing stuff that is totally way off? And you always get the sort of the classic, I'm a Java developer and they're giving me JavaScript jobs. Do they have any
Yeah.
idea what I do? So that kind of stuff. That's a very extreme kind of urban legend type of example, but similar things can kind of happen as well. And also probably are they managing expectations? If they're submitting your resume to a company that's like kind of slow for feedback, it's going to be 1 to 2 weeks. Are they telling you, listen, this company's kind of slow for feedback, it's going to be 1 to 2 weeks, so don't worry if I don't have feedback for you tomorrow. I'll be chasing them, but this is what this company's a bit like. So again, are they trying to give you a good user experience in there as well? So I think, if you have red flags in many of these areas, then I would say it's not working. And maybe a different recruiter, even in the same agency, could be a better fit, or perhaps it's just work with somebody else. Most jobs are not exclusive to one agent, unless it's like a kind of retained search for sort of senior level kind of things, which may be. But most sort of mid-level, junior level, even senior level dev roles are out with probably several agents. So you can probably get the same job from somebody else that you maybe have a better fit with.
So yeah, I was thinking that when I check out some of these, like there are like foreign dev job posting, and it's almost the same company and same position. So if it's not going well with one recruiter, another recruiter could probably help you out if you fit
Yeah,
that position.
if it's so yeah. I mean, you'll sort of think, wow, I found 7 jobs today, but then you read them and they all kind of look the same. Now that may be one company that's given it to 7 agents, and the agents have all put
Oh,
up their own ad, so you're seeing the same thing. If the agent has submitted your resume, then most agencies and clients have a basic kind of an agreement to once the resume is submitted, that agent basically works with that candidate, and they'll
okay.
be unlikely to switch and say have somebody else. I've been in situations where like a competitor sent someone resume, they've had no feedback, it's been a poor experience, like, Paul, can you step in? I know the client, I talk to them and like, listen, no, we've got to go with the original agent, because if not, they'll they're kind of, they'll sue us or they won't work with us anymore, and we want to keep the relationship. So if it's before your resume has been submitted, then yeah, you can probably find the same role with somebody else, and kind of work with someone that treats you better.
That's interesting. Just one little part. I don't know if it's a good question though. There's a lot of young people too in recruiting.
Yeah.
They just finish university, they just go straight out, and I don't know how to ask this, but they're probably really fighting to how would you say, to stand out. But let's
Mm-hmm.
say, Paul, you've been doing this for like 24 years. You're not scratching the bottom of the barrel just to get someone hired. I'm just trying to ask so that I'm not saying avoid really young, new,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
I would prefer to have Paul look after me than a young guy really working to learn the ropes.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's a really fair point. It's like, I might, again, I was on day one at one point, so I wouldn't say don't work with someone just because they're junior or they're new,
Yeah.
because what if the recruiting company is good, that person is being supported. So they've got a
Okay.
manager who's taking care of them and is able to step in if any sort of issues arise that need troubleshooting. They've got other teammates and other things like that. So they're typically not on their own and sort of lost.
Okay.
They may not be able to answer questions very quickly. They may have to let me come back to you on that and other things like that. But I certainly wouldn't say I wouldn't work with somebody who's sort of new just because of that. If they've
Yeah.
got a role, they may have a role that looks great. They may have a good relationship with the company. They may be trying to prove themselves and working very hard to hustle for you. And
Yeah.
so, I would say that's, if there's a good relationship and you like them, go for it. I think having a lot of experience doesn't necessarily correspond to being good at your job either. there's that old joke like, do you have 10 years experience or 1 year's experience 10 times? And
Yeah,
it's very easy in recruitment just to kind of do the same thing over and over again and not get out
yeah,
of your comfort zone and do other things. Tech recruitment is a bit different. Tech, because it changes so much, does force you to learn and be more on your toes. But I think, if there's someone that fits, they treat you well,
yeah,
then work with them. Personally, I typically would say to people, having 2 or 3 different agents is probably a good thing. No one agency or agent's going to have like every job. Now, working with a few different agents can be good just to kind of cover.
is that okay? I didn't know if that's like, because they might ask, are
Absolutely.
you working with another agent?
As a recruiter, I just want to know kind of what's going on. So, if I
Yeah.
say, have you applied to this company? And you say, yeah, I applied already. And it was like a week ago or a month ago. Great. I don't need to spend time looking on that. I can
Mm.
then go off and look at something else. I've had situations where people are like, no, never heard of it. Never heard of that company. I send the resume and then the client calls me up very angry saying like, we've had this resume from like 7 recruiters this morning. What's going on?
No,
And like, that doesn't work. So,
no.
track what you're doing, know who you're talking to, who you're applying with. And again, if you're telling other people and sort of say, I've already applied, so I'm covered there, thank you. Do you have anything else? Absolutely fine. And again, the key is you need to get a job, right? So
Yeah,
I think, you throw a wide net. I probably wouldn't work with like 20 different recruiters because then you're
no.
just really doubling up a lot on the same things. And it's very difficult to make relationships then. But, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, absolutely makes sense.
Like, I don't think it's a,
I, oh yeah, the question. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
you're probably better off with a specialist just because
yeah,
they should have more jobs, better understanding of the market, be able to advise you better. However, there are generalists sort of like, we only work with insurance companies and we do
yeah,
everything. If they had an interesting job, I'd still talk to them because a lot of the recruitment basics, managing the process, negotiation, all that would be the same.
yeah.
So I would probably, if I was just looking for a recruiter, I'd probably go with a specialist. But if someone contacted me as a generalist, then I'd say, hey, what have you got? And kind of see how it
Yeah.
is. Take it from there.
This one I think it's interesting too is what are some things you want foreign engineers to understand before working with a recruiter or coming to work IT in Japan? You kind of touched based on it in the earlier questions, but I think if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting because I talk to people all around the world, and there are agencies all around the world, and things operate very differently. So, for example, in some places, the job hunter, pays the agent, which is not how it works in Japan.
Hmm.
So, so things like that. So, I think probably what I would want someone to understand is basically I'm a middleman, but I'm being paid by only one party, and that's the
Yeah.
hiring company. So I'm trying to get a win-win, but I'm basically being paid to find people for their jobs, for the hiring company's jobs. It's not primarily I'm being paid to find a job for somebody. Now,
Yeah.
often you're talking to someone and you'll say, well, I don't have anything, but I'll go look for something. But, at the same time, your customers are calling saying, hey, we gave you that job 2 months ago. What's going on? So we're primarily, trying to fill open roles for hiring companies, and that can be different than how things work in other countries, where the agent is really sort of working for the job hunter, for example, and
Hmm.
it's sort of a different relationship. I think the the question about working with maybe it's like how to get the best out of the relationship then is probably
Hmm.
just to be very open about what you want. We're typically very nosy. We want to ask a lot of things. That's because we've usually seen all the problems that come up in hiring, and we're trying to head them off at the pass. So,
Hmm.
if someone's sort of like, what's your salary expectations? I don't want to tell you. Then I'm like, well, there's a lot of different things I could be looking at for you. But if you tell me I'm only taking 50 million or above, then I'll spend my time looking at those jobs. And
Yeah.
then the stuff that's 8 million, I don't need to spend time on. And I'm going to make you much happier and we'll have a better result. So I think just being open and honest. And it's a two-way street. I think the recruiter should be, giving you feedback and giving you direct and honest feedback how things are going. Not always the case. Obviously, a lot of people, there's a lot of complaints about recruiters in-house and agency,
Hmm.
and generally very valid. but I think just sort of, being open is a good thing, and just being, what you're about, what you're really looking for, and would be happy with, and stuff like that. I think maybe a question about in terms of working in IT in Japan, or just working in Japan. Um, I think the key thing is you're not on holiday anymore. If your experience in Japan is a 3 week holiday, and you went to the robot cafe when it was open, and
Yeah,
you did all the tourist stuff. When you're working here, it's pretty much Monday to Friday. 8 hours of work, right?
yeah,
And they're kind of, everyone's living for the weekend here, the same as everywhere else. So, it's a very different experience, and I think some people can kind of feel a bit disappointed when, if they're running away from a life to come to Japan and then find out that they've still got an electricity bill to pay. There's still rent due on the 25th of the month. Your boss is still going to want a one-on-one, and you're behind on what you're supposed to have done for them, and all of these kind of things. So I think, if you're coming here to work in IT or anything else, understand kind of what you're getting into. Japan does have that little bit of utopia image to a lot of people,
mm.
but it's just a regular country with, it has its own pros and cons. And so I think figuring out and understanding, does it fit you, is it suitable for you, is probably a good thing.
Yeah. There's a lot of I met a lot of people who come on holiday and they said they'd love to live here, but I think they just say it, but I don't know if they would really love to live here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think, it's a big commitment, and
Yeah,
and you're often giving up. You're leaving your family, you're leaving friends.
yeah,
It's a big thing, and it doesn't fit everyone. Some people very lonely go home. Others
yeah,
people settle in and never leave. So, but I think that the more you prepare and look into things and just get a realistic view of things, I think with research you can find the pros and the cons of living here, and sort of working in IT or just general life as well. So, I think just make sure you've researched it.
yeah.
Again, the salaries and all of those kind of things, maybe way better than what you get at home, maybe way lower than what you get at home. And just being very, just doing your research and understanding how things are, I think is a key thing.
The next section is not so much to it, but it is kind of interesting itself. Is the resume and presentation, and but it's also because if you're working with if you're working with foreign, or let's say English speaking companies, everything's in English, and it's probably more like a unified how
Yeah,
Western countries would do it.
yeah,
I'm guessing.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So the question, like, should you put your picture on your resume? So
Yeah,
again, if the job advert's in English, feel free to send a typical sort of Western style
yeah,
resume. There's no need for it to be a one pager. So US is one page, and I get these, like, everything's written in 7 point because, you got to
uh,
fit on the page. Depending on your experience, 2 or 3 pages, is perfectly fine. Question about pictures, and the traditional Japanese Rirek show kind of form has a picture on it.
yeah,
You wear a black
yeah,
suit and a white shirt, and you kind of stare blankly into space. Personally, I prefer not to have pictures on resumes. I would take them off unless someone
that's
wanted it
interesting.
sent through. Yeah. The reason is it's the focal point. It's the first thing someone looks at. And
Mm,
for good or bad, people start, like, thinking about, there's a bias in there,
yeah,
and there's unconscious or not. Even if people try to avoid it, there, it's very, it's visual on a big page full of text. So, you get viewed, you get evaluated. What I want is your content. That
yeah,
first, like, candidate summary, that first paragraph, to get the person interested in you. If they want to see how you look, well, they can have an interview, or they maybe go have a look on LinkedIn or something like that, where people typically have pictures. But I would say, usually you can use the space for something better. Now, if you're submitting a typical Japanese Rirek show as part of the process, or maybe when some companies, you can use an English style resume in the start, but when they're hiring and doing offers, they want sort of more re-rec shows and that kind of paperwork for file, then you're going to end up having a picture and all that sort of stuff. But they've already seen you by then. It's
mm,
hopefully too late for them to change their mind, and you're going to get the job. So for me, I prefer not to. I think, a lot of bootcamp grads, entry level people, they feel like they don't have a lot of stuff to put on their resume.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of like, it fills up a corner, and, sort of, go for it if you want to. But I think, I just prefer not to get judged on that.
Mm.
as well. It's a kind of I've had resumes where the next thing I'm looking in the background and it's like what's on the bookshelf there, and I'm kind of and
Yeah.
I'm I've moved away from the view of the content is what I should be looking at. So yeah, so that's my kind of preference on that. But if you want to put it on there, feel free to.
Yeah. You kind of touched based on the format and picture and all that. Uh,
Yeah,
unless you want to go into that.
actually, yeah, because this is an interesting question. Because the way it was worded, so does the English resume need to look really good in terms of format, or is just the very basic layout okay? And my answer is like yes and yes, because to me, a very simple basic format is a good format to look at. So
Okay.
I think when people think about format, looking good, they talk about design. Do I need a
Mm.
blue column down there, and should all my headings be in different colors and all of that kind of stuff? I don't mind a little bit of color, if you want to highlight company names or sections with different colors and stuff like that. But I've had some monstrosities where people have like, I want to stand out, so I'm gonna have like designs and watermarks. And what happens is very difficult to read.
Yeah.
And if you're reading resume, and then something's up, and you're kind of like, I can't, it's tough to read, a bit garish,
Mm.
and design is very subjective. Yeah, you think this is a great design, and someone else is kind of like, "Ugh." And now that's their impression of you because your resume is all they've got to go on. So I think it's fairly simple. Like a summary. I do. People sort of like say don't have objectives. I like a summary, which is just a 2 or 3 sentence snapshot, especially kind of if you're overseas, highlighting your desire to be in Japan, for example.
Oh,
I'm
yeah, yeah.
studying Japanese and I want to work, because that's where someone's going to look and go, oh, this person, the reason they're applying for jobs in Japan. They're not just sort of applying everywhere. Tech skills, work experience, education, language, contact details at the top. If you have a visa, get that in there. Very basic, but clean and simple, not all squished up white space, makes the person who's reading 50 or 100 resumes makes their job a lot easier. And if it's clean and nicely presented, we start thinking you're nicely presented.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's very, yeah. And I've had people, use like kind of wacky headings
Mm.
just to try and stand out. And it's like, the, what was that? Occupational chronology, which was like the work experience. I'm like, no, that's just trying too hard. Just work
Yeah.
experience, career history, keep it simple.
Yeah.
Again, it's the content that is going to get you the interview, and how that fits what the company's looking for. So I would avoid the wacky formats, keep it nice and simple. A little bit of color for headings and stuff is absolutely fine. Doesn't need to be one page, couple of pages, absolutely fine again. And keep it simple is always the best way forward, I think.
That that's one thing I do like about the Japanese like lead show and the skill sheet. It's just everything's the same, so you don't have to worry
Yeah,
about standing out. Just show what you do, and you leave it off.
it's a leveler, right? It really does
Yeah.
sort of like everyone's working off the same sort of basic piece of paper, which again I think sort of can remove bias and stuff. Except of course there's a big photo right in the top corner,
Yeah.
and if you're kind of the wrong side of 50 like me, it's kind of like, ooh, he's got grey hair,
Yeah.
ooh, scary. If you're a good-looking person like yourself, Tyrone, stick your photo on there. It's going to open the doors, but simple format.
I gotta shave and do my hair nicely like you.
I can't see that happening.
Yeah. Great. So yeah, that is something. Yeah, that's important to me to have some kind of good impression. But yeah, I'm pretty bad at that. So we'll carry on with next question there. And now's the job market and opportunities.
Yeah,
And the first one, this is probably the most of the people who come to you. Then most people are outside of Japan. Majority of engineers. So the question is, how possible is it to get hired as a developer from outside of Japan? Yeah, how difficult is
yeah.
it?
Is it? Yeah. So is it possible? How difficult it is? So it is possible. I think even before COVID, companies were starting to hire people from overseas, doing Skype interviews, that kind of stuff. COVID, because everyone was working remotely and doing their daily business with Google Meets and Zooms and all of those kind of things, they realized they were doing all the regular interviews. Then it was like, well, this, if we're going to have a Google Meet with someone in Tokyo, we could have a Google Meet with someone in Paris. It's the same thing.
Mm.
And so companies then started seeing sort of flexibility, and then we started to see a lot more people coming in And again, once the COVID border restrictions were open, last couple of years, a lot more people have been coming through. So it is very possible. I wouldn't say it's easy. There is
Mm.
we talk about the shortage. Companies are open to hiring from overseas, are looking to bring in experience. They're not looking to bring in potential. So
Mm.
they're not looking for new grads or people, 1 year's experience. They're looking for 5 years, 8 years, mid to senior level people who are often, improving the teams that they're joining somewhat or significantly, and kind of raising the bar in many respects. So it's also at the moment, so there's the sort of the experience type of barriers. And then I think also Japan's very popular now.
Yeah.
The week yen, everyone sort of seems to have been on holiday here or is planning on a holiday here. And a lot of people have done the, 2 or 3 weeks, I want to look at jobs in Japan. So there's a lot of competition. You open up a role and you're going to get hundreds of resumes from sort of everywhere. And so, especially with things not being great in the US
Mm.
and Japan's, safe country, good place to live. It's
Yep.
very attractive to people from other parts of like Asia, to perhaps have looking for a better life as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of competition. So if you're good at what you do, if you've got sort of, several years of experience, below 2 years of experience is very difficult. Most job
Okay.
descriptions, the minimum is sort of like 2 years, I see. Even if it says 2 years, again, people with 4 years experience are going to apply.
Yep. Yep.
Maybe they fit the same budget, so the company's going to be kind of looking at that. So it is possible. I would, again, you may have perhaps a skill set that's a bit not as common in the market, AI
Yep.
skills, or other things like that. So there may be maybe easier for some people like that, or advanced degrees and things like that. But in general, it's sort of like quite experienced people are what companies are looking for.
Yeah. That's the. I kind of give advice to a lot of. I give advice to people from like with different how to say experiences, but I do tell like the junior devs or junior guys like don't don't feel bad if you can't get a job. Like
Yeah,
this is not easy. Like
yeah,
don't just put all your eggs in one basket. Okay, I want to get through. I'm going to go to the website. I want to apply for all these jobs. I want to get one. I just try and give them something a bit more realistic to say
yeah,
you probably won't, but
yeah,
here there are
yeah.
other ways to do it.
Yeah. I think, I say to people, get experience in your home country or, do remote work or other things like that. Once you get experience, then it's going to be much easier to apply for roles. 2 years is sort of, I would say, 2 years plus. Again, very, very competitive. You want to be very good at what you're doing as well.
Yeah,
So, the entry level, the junior end of the market, there are bootcamp grads here. There are self-taught developers. There are other people already local who
yeah,
can kind of fill up that demand, without having to kind of go overseas for somebody as well. So, what companies, if they're willing to go through the time and the expense of relocating, then it's sort of people who know what they're doing, very short onboarding, producing and kind of contributing very quickly.
yeah. That's absolutely true. You can get a boot camp grad like 6 months on the job quickly. Just like next month, get them learning everything, and within 6 months, you got a worker that's
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
well.
yeah. And many of those people, they've already got visas, they've got lives here,
Yep,
so visa to process, they can switch over their sort of sponsorship. They're 1 month's notice. That's
yep,
typical in Japan, right? So there's just a month, and then they're on board. And
yep.
so that's quick and easy to some extent. You can meet people face to face if you want to, go for lunch before you hire, all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Next one. I don't know if some of these are kind of connecting. All these questions are kind of connecting in some ways.
right. Yeah. So the next one was like, what are the restrictions for getting hired as a developer? I think the only real restriction is sort of visa. Do
Yeah.
you qualify? Can you qualify, or can you not? Do you not qualify? I'm not aware of there sort of being any sort of quotas or anything like that. The sort of people from the four corners of the earth turning up here, and so really, it's can you the visa hurdle is the restriction really.
Hmm.
Yeah, in terms of any sort of non-company preference, obviously companies may prefer this, that, and the other, but in
Yeah.
terms of like bureaucracy or other things, it's can you get a visa?
The next one is an interesting one because some people come here and within 1 year of their job, they quit and find something else. So can you switch to a different company after getting a job in Japan?
Yes, you can. So basically, yes. And there's a few things to consider. One, I would say sort of job hunting. If you're job hunting very soon after you've arrived here, companies are going to want to know what's up. So
Um,
is it you or is it the company? Because if you've taken a full-time job and 3 months later you're back in the market, something's not working out somewhere. Now,
hmm,
the company goes bust and you're like, I'm sorry, the company hired me, but they can't pay my salary now. Explain that, get that in your cover letter. People will say understood. If it's kind of like, well, I'm kind of just sort of seeing what else is out there, then companies are going to be hesitant because they hire you, and then does this happen 3 months later again? So there's the
hmm,
the aspect of actually finding a job. Companies tend to be more conservative here in hiring than in other locations, and that could be Japanese companies or foreign companies. They often reasonably conservative. So kind of your motivation, why you're looking, what's going on is going to be a big question. I do see people in some markets and every year they change. That
hmm,
in Japan is, there will be companies where they go not interested because they're only going to stay a year and we have to do all this hiring again.
hmm,
And no, it's not worth it. So, but if there's a reason that you need to, again, maybe the company isn't as you expected, the work isn't what you were promised, things can happen. Try and get that in a cover letter or something when you get your resume through. Um, in terms of visas, then, an engineer visa sticks with you. So basically, you're probably going to get like a 1 year visa when you use engineer visa, or maybe a 3 year. I think it's 1 year, 3 year, 5 years. But say whatever you get, um, you can change company. You fill in an online form for immigration that about the new company, and then you just continue on that engineer visa until the expiry. Your new employer should then be doing the renewal, sponsoring you for a renewal.
hmm,
And obviously, the company's hired you; they know that they should be doing that for you. Um, H highly skilled professional visas a little bit more tricky because it is tied to your employer because
oh,
things about the employment are part of the point system. So, and I only found this out fairly recently. I talked to somebody who wanted to change, and so basically, changing your highly skilled professional visa sort of like gets cancelled, and then you've got to apply for a new visa. And I
oh,
think the person I spoke to was kind of like the company they were joining didn't know they had to sponsor for a new visa, so they hadn't done it. And so this person was kind of left like they'd already finished at one company, they had an offer, but the new company hadn't yet applied and was just getting the like, oh wow, we need a lawyer, quick, get this going. So yeah, the highly skilled professional is sort of dependent upon the company you work for. At
hmm,
least that's my understanding from talking to various people. And so for that, then yeah, you can move, but you're going to be looking for going for a new visa. Most people are going to want to use the highly skilled professional for the kind of permanent residency fast track. So
okay.
I think a lot of people are just going to take the job and then say permanent residency is the goal. The job, fine. I'll just stay where I am until I get my permanent residency. With permanent residency, then you can just sort of do whatever you like.
That
But yeah,
that
you
ex-
can.
that explains a guy in my community. He because I'm using LivTech, but I've got a normal working visa, and it's fine. But he said they didn't accept his highly or the HSP visa,
Right.
maybe because of
Yeah.
that.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't know the rules around like side work and things
Yeah,
for highly skilled professional. For engineer, you can do designated activities, and if you have an engineer visa and you're a developer and
yeah,
your side work is more development,
yeah,
that's a designated activity. If you go off and be a baker, you're not,
yeah.
that's not a designated activity and you shouldn't be doing that on that visa.
Hmm.
So it may well be the highly skilled professional visa that got kind of
Yeah.
scuppered that person's chances of that there.
Okay. The next one.